They gave their right hands of fellowship to me and Barnabas, acknowledging that we would go to the Gentiles and they would work with the circumcised. They only stressed one point, that we should remember the poor, the very thing I was eager to do.
Remember the poor. It seemed a simple gesture of shared values. But as Paul, Barnabas, and Titus returned to Antioch, pleased with their victory, the conflict over Gentile converts was far from settled.
Okay, here again, what do you see here? Two sources. See if you can, well, let's just, everybody know, this is Luke's blessings. Blessed are you poor, yours is the kingdom. Blessed are you that hunger now. Blessed are you that weep now. Blessed are you when men hate you and exclude you, and so forth. So basically it's four blessings: the poor, the hungry, the ones weeping, and the ones persecuted. You got that? Go over to Matthew. Matthew, I believe, is taking Luke and expanding it, and this is the version everybody knows, the so-called Beatitudes. But notice how it is quite a bit different. Blessed are you poor becomes poor in spirit. Blessed are you that mourn, that could be about the same. Hunger and thirst is after righteousness now. See how it's being spiritualized more? And blessed are the
You wonder if there's like some rich people behind this gospel going, yeah, I don't know about this.
Yeah, it could be. You're going to see. So here's the two sources again. Call it Q, call it whatever you want. I don't care what you call it. They're right there. You can read them. And you can see now they're different. I believe that Luke has priority in terms of following this two source. Now, he's written later, but I think one of his reasons for writing is he wanted to preserve more the original version of the two source that he had, and Matthew is adapting it. Now, I'll show you more examples of that. Go ahead. Next. And again, let me just add, if I put them all together, what have I got? It doesn't even make sense. Blessed are you poor, and also if you're poor in spirit, you're good too. Blessed are you. You see, it's just, come on. Let's be real here.
A lot of people would ask Jesus, who gave you that authority? You're not a rabbi. It's not an academic debate. This affects people's lives, and there's a lot at stake.
But there was another, even more dangerous authority his teachings would provoke.
First century Palestine was occupied by a colonial force, which was Rome, and therefore Rome considered itself to be the authority, the power, the kingdom. So anyone else who preached an alternative kingdom with an alternative authority apart from Caesar was challenging Rome.
Jesus said, if you're going to trample over the poor, if you're going to be completely blasé and self-seeking, then it's coming for you.
For nothing enraged the rebels more than a Jew who had abandoned Jewish traditions for Roman ones. To the rebels, the worst culprits were wealthy Jews who broke the law God gave to Moses on Mount Sinai, restricting the enslavement of fellow Jews. The mistreated slaves offered the rebels a perfect opportunity to add to their ranks. And so they began attacking the estate of one wealthy Jew after another, freeing the slaves and inviting them to join the rebellion.
They have an unconquerable love of freedom. For them, God is the only Lord and Master. They think it little to submit to torturous forms of death and punishment of their family and friends, if only they can call no man master.
That's why it's associated.
That's correct. It's a Jewish Christian text.
Yeah.
It's in James chapter 5, verse 6. I'm trying to find it right now.
It has that wonderful Ebionite type language, woe to the rich, which is part of the negative beatitudes that we only find in Luke. Matthew cuts out the negative the curses, blessed are the poor and all that. Well, Matthew leaves out the cursed or cursed to curse to the. You have to go to Luke's version of the beatitudes, where you get blessed are the poor, then you get who are comfortable down.
I'm going to read verses 1 to 6 in chapter 5 of the letter of James. Go to now, you rich men, weep and howl for your miseries that shall come upon you. Your riches are corrupted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver is cankered, and the rust of them shall be witness against you, and shall eat your flesh as it were fire. Ye have heaped treasure together for the last days. Behold the hire of the laborers who have reaped down your fields, which is of you kept back by fraud. Crieth and the cries of them which have reaped, and are entered into the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth. Ye have lived in pleasure on the earth, and been wanton. Ye have nourished your hearts as in a day of slaughter. Ye have condemned and killed the just, and he doth not resist you.
That could describe either the martyrdoms of James or Jesus, but James is the one.
I think it's more like James because of Clementine recognitions. Yeah.
He's the one called the just or the righteous one, and it was really interesting. Within the Dead Sea Scrolls sectarian documents, the concept of the poor is almost a term of art for the sectarians themselves. And we're told by Josephus about the poorer priests, as if this group of priests is code for the ultra-conservatives, the rebel-leaning ones, the ones who don't want to work with the Herodian high priesthood and the Herods. And of course, in any rebel situation, it's going to be the poor and the disaffected who are most likely to join the rebellion. Those who are fat and wealthy and happy under the Romans aren't likely to join the rebellion. So poor is sort of code word for the Jewish rebels. It's code for the early Jesus movement, I believe. And did they take care of the poor? Yes, we're told that the Essenes, for example, by Josephus, held their property in common and took care of the poor, just as we read in the New Testament, in the book of Acts, the apostles held their property in common, and they were concerned about the poor. That is a direct connection between the Essenes and the Christians, for example, and in my view, a direct connection between the Dead Sea Scrolls sectarians, the Qumran sectarians, and the Christians as well. Poor is a connection, and it's a rebel connection, and we have it even in the early Christian movement known as the Ebionites. The very word, the etymology, means the poor. And I think that it's very interesting the way Matthew or Matthew's source changes the Beatitudes that I just mentioned. I think some of this language may go all the way back to the original Jesus movement. Blessed are the poor, and it was the that was the language. You are lucky because you're part of us, the poor. So fortunate are you poor, because the wealthy are going to suffer come the revolution, and that's the rebel talk, obviously. And cursed are you rich, we will hear in Luke's version of it. And I think since Luke also has the more pure blessed are the poor versus blessed are the poor in spirit, look what Matthew or Matthew's source, as I say, has done. They've neutralized that. It's not the poor who are the fortunate, but the poor in spirit who are the fortunate. In Luke's more original version that contains the curses, it's simply the poor. So blessed are you poor, cursed are you rich, because trouble's coming for you rich people when we rebels take over. That gives me sounds a whole lot to me like original Qumran type language, pre-war Jesus movement language, rebel language, that is anti-rich pro-poor, pro this poor priest party that Josephus talks about, and the poor who are spoken of, I think, as themselves in code in the Dead Sea Scrolls sectarian documents. So, yeah, it sounds to me like this James guy this is authentic early Christian movement language that I think we're reading in the Epistle of James. This could be real, authentic Jesus movement language. We hear it in what we call, whatever you think of Q. We hear it in the Q material that pops up into the Gospels in Matthew and Luke. We hear it here in the Epistle of James, and it seems to be an echo of still earlier rebel or type language. I think authentic to the pre-war Jesus movement.
And sitting on top of this religious structure were the Sadducees.
The Sadducees were very conservative. They tended to be wealthy aristocrats, very closely allied to Rome and Rome's interests, much less liked by the ordinary people.
And it was these hated collaborators, the Sadducees, who had a complete monopoly of Jerusalem's holy temple and its rituals.
Behind me is the holiest site in Judaism. It's the western wall of what used to be the outer wall to the temple, which stood above it, the holy temple. And this was the center of Judaism. This was the house of God, where the heaven and earth met. Now, for the first time in 1,000 years, you've got a crisis where the people do not regard the priesthood as legitimate.
Not far from the Western Wall are some first-century remains that reveal the enormous gulf that existed between the priesthood and the average Judean.
Where I'm standing right now, it's 20 feet below the present surface of Jerusalem, inside the old city. And this is the basement area of a very luxurious complex of mansions that the high priests inhabited in the time of Jesus. You can notice these luxurious mosaic floors. And behind me is this bathtub. We're talking about very wealthy royal people would have this kind of luxury. Can you imagine it going up 2 and 3 stories with luxurious rooms and apartments and courtyards and so forth? Even though the Sadducees would certainly defend their position and their wealth, I think on the ground, it was quite easy for the common people to see them as overly wealthy and corrupt, and essentially, as we would say today, ripping off the masses for their own luxury and comfort.
But you're beginning to see why precisely then Jesus, John the Baptist in Perea, Jesus in Galilee, the 2 parts of his territories, might resist him at that time. And we're beginning to see why people might be ready for that message. A double demonstration against Roman imperial power and conservative theological collaboration with it. He's going up to protest, in plain language, the collusion between the Roman governor Pilate and the Jewish high priest Caiaphas.
I can already hear some of the objections. What are you saying here? That Jesus was a copycat? And I must say that's a totally unhistorical way of approaching the issue. If you think that Jesus was influenced by no one and he knew exactly where he was going and he landed like an alien from outer space, there's no point looking at any archaeology. But if you put Jesus in his historical context, first century Judea, he was, after all, a first century Jew, then you suddenly have to say, wait a minute, here's a man living in a country under Roman occupation. Clearly he's going to be influenced by people and he's going to influence people.
There were 3 centers for this rebellion. three messianic leaders. One, Judah in the Galilee, the second one, Atronges in Emmaus, and the third one, Simon from the Perea, from the area of Transjordan.
Suddenly, our idea of the world that Jesus was born into seems very different from anything that we heard about in Christmas carols. I mean, this was no tranquil land with shepherds tending their flock and wise men following stars. This was a land riddled by political unrest and violence, rape, pillage, crucifixions, Jews against Romans. There was a revolution going on.
The boycott of the red slip plates begins around the year 4 BCE. What's remarkable is that it endures for 70 years.
The Jews of Galilee didn't get tired of doing it. They kept on boycotting. They never let up. They stuck to it all the way until the actual time of the revolt, when the Romans came in and stopped them.
Equally striking is that the boycott begins almost exactly at the time when Jesus of Nazareth is born. He grows up when the land is seething with protest and apocalyptic vision, certain to inflame young minds. Today, Jesus is known as a man of peace. But his ministry may well have proclaimed the volatile message that many hoped to hear in those brutal times, a call to revolution. Looking up, he is paralyzed by a sight more horrifying than any he could have imagined. He sees a naked man gasping for breath, crying for mercy, and dying slowly, painfully upon a cross.
Nobody's sure who invented crucifixion, but it's clear that the Romans developed it to a fine art. This is a way that you execute a man that becomes a billboard, a human billboard of state terror. And you hang him high and stretch him wide so that everybody in the province can see that if you broke Roman rule, this could happen to you.
In the year 4 BCE, Herod the Great dies. Immediately, the provinces of Palestine erupt in unrest. Quickly and methodically, the Romans march through Israel and re-establish their Pax Romana. They arrest or capture all who have challenged the law. Then, on a single day, they crucify them, thousands of Israelites, all at once.
Anybody who was living in that part of the world at that time, men, women, children, babies, could be going up and down the main thoroughfare and see hundreds of men extended on crosses, elevated in the sun, perhaps being eaten by birds, their bodies becoming carrion on these crossbars, dying in excruciating death. This may have been one of Jesus' earliest memories.
Could it be that a young Jesus gazed up and saw his own fate? Is it possible that this brutal sight seared into his mind both the desperate need for a Messiah and its inevitable end?